Hello, team players. The Aldori Duelist was always a pretty hard archetype to take because you needed to be trained in Aldori dueling swords specifically. And the only way to do that really was to be a fighter or take the weapon proficiency general feat to get advanced weapons. And that's what the Aldori dueling sword is. But it's been remastered in Battlecry. Now the dedication only requires you to be trained in martial weapons. And not only does it give you access to Aldori dueling swords, but it also makes you trained in them. You also treat them as martial weapons for the purposes of your proficiency in them. It is still an excellent archetype for fighters, but other classes like rogues and swashbucklers can take it much easier now. However, it does have the access requirement of being from the Broken Lands region, so your GM may or may not allow you to take this archetype. For the dedication, you also become trained in either acrobatics or athletics. And if you're already trained in the skill that you pick, you become an expert as well. You also get the additional lore skill feat for dueling lore. If you're already trained in dueling lore, you become trained in a different lore skill of your choice. If we look at the Aldori dueling sword, it has the finesse and versatile piercing traits, and does 1d8 damage. The rapier has deadly d8, disarm, and finesse, but it only does a 1d6 damage. So the rapier definitely has better traits with less damage. But the rapier also doesn't have a complete archetype dedicated to it. So overall, if you have this archetype, you're obviously going to want to pick up those Aldori dueling swords. Otherwise, you probably want the rapier. Also at level 2, you can take the Dueling Acumen skill feat. When you're in a duel, or you can see exactly one creature, that is very important, you can always roll dueling lore for your initiative. When you do so in a duel, you must choose Deception, Intimidation, or Perception when you roll initiative each round. You are considered to have rolled the chosen skill for initiative for the purposes of dueling actions. This matters quite a bit for those dueling actions. But what are dueling actions? Unlike in regular combat, in a duel, you roll initiative each round, and each duelist must choose either Intimidation, Deception, or Perception to roll for their initiative. Because a duelist might go twice in a row, abilities that last until the end of the duelist's next turn might function oddly. A duelist going second can choose to avoid such abilities on their turn, or choose to act second if they win initiative next round. Neither duelist is aware of what the other rolls for initiative, so dueling requires quite a bit of luck. If a duelist is at least trained in whatever initiative choice they pick, they gain a dueling reaction. Familiars and companions cannot use these reactions even if allowed in the duel, and neither can bystanders. Perception, which every duelist gets because everyone is at least trained in perception, you get sense weakness. The trigger is you attempted a melee strike against your opponent, but you haven't rolled yet. To use this reaction, you must be in a duel. When you use this reaction, the opponent is off guard against that attack. If the opponent was using Deception for initiative when this reaction is used, they are off guard until the start of their next turn. This makes this one great for teamwork in duels where more than one combatant is allowed, as if they use Deception for their initiative, they are off guard to everyone, not just you. If you're in a duel, train in Deception, and use Deception for initiative, you can use Deceptive Sidestep. The trigger is the opponent hits you, but doesn't crit you with a melee strike. The opponent must roll again and use the second result. If the opponent used Deception for initiative, they also take a -2 penalty on the second attack roll. And finally, if you're trained in Intimidation and used Intimidation for initiative that round, you can use Bullying Press. If you attempt a melee attack roll against your opponent, and you haven't rolled yet, you can use this reaction. The opponent becomes frightened 1 if you hit. If the opponent is using Perception for initiative when this ability is activated, they become frightened 2 instead. This is also good for teamwork in duels where more than 2 people are allowed, as frightened applies to all their attack rolls, not just against you. That is essentially all you need to know in order to melee duel. Otherwise, dueling works like regular combat. There are spellcasting duels, but that doesn't really apply to this archetype most of the time. At level 4, we have the Aldori Parry feat. You must be wielding only Aldori Dueling Swords to use this feat. You can spend one action to parry with your Aldori Dueling Sword. And Aldori Dueling Swords that you're wielding gain the parry trait, allowing you to parry attacks. If you have your other hand or hands free while using an Aldori Dueling Sword, you get more of a bonus from the parry trait than usual. Also at level 4, we have Duelist Edge. This is a free action that you can use when you roll initiative and can see at least one opponent. You gain a +2 bonus on your initiative roll and can interact to draw an Aldori Dueling Sword. Most of the time this one isn't that useful, as you'll be able to draw your sword as a free action most encounters. But the bonus on initiative is useful, and it's good to be able to draw your weapon if you get surprised. Aldori Riposte requires Aldori Parry. When an opponent within your reach crit fails a strike against you, and you're using your Aldori Dueling Sword to parry, as a reaction you can make a melee strike, or you can attempt to disarm the triggering opponent using that same sword. This is much more helpful now, as disarm is a much better action since the remaster. And this works really well with the other feat I'm about to talk about now, which is Unnerving Prowess, which is also available at level 6. This one is significantly better than before the remaster because disarm is better. Also, they made it so now not only can you use it when you critically hit with a strike or critically succeed on a disarm, but you can also do it when you regularly succeed on either of those if it's the first round of the encounter. So what does it do? It allows you to demoralize the target of your strike or disarm as a free action. And you essentially get Intimidating Glare since it does not have the auditory traits, and you don't take a penalty if the opponent doesn't understand you. This is an insane feat now, and remember, it does work with Aldori Riposte since it is a free action. With Saving Slash, when the opponent critically hits you, and as a reaction, you can attempt a DC 15 flat check. If you can succeed, the attack becomes a normal hit. It's not that great of a feat. It can be useful if you can manage to pull it off, but DC 15 is very high for a flat check, so you won't get this off very often. Then we have 1-on-1. You must be trained in Deception, and you can use it once per round. For one action, you can attempt to feint and strike the target with your sword. The feint attempt must be against the same target as your strike. This is very good action economy. You're basically getting 2 actions for the price of 1, which is always very good. At level 14, you can take Aldori's Retort. This gives you an additional reaction that you can only use for Aldori Riposte, Saving Slash, or any of those cool dueling reactions that I talked about earlier in this video. It's pretty nice to have extra reactions, and this gives you one for any of those reactions. Duelist Form is a stance you can go into for one action when you're wielding an Aldori Dueling Sword, your other hand is free, and you're not fatigued. While in this stance, you are quickened, and being quickened is very good, especially since you can use it for any single action gained from this archetype or to step. But if you use your free hand for anything, the stance ends. Even something like using a potion. And when the stance ends, you're fatigued until you rest for 10 minutes. You won't be able to use this all the time, but it's extremely useful when you can. We also have Tempo Duelist at level 16. For one action, you become concealed for 1 round. But your location is obvious, so no hiding or sneaking using this feat. This can be useful during dueling, since they have to roll a flat check in order to hit you. But since you can't use this to hide or sneak, it isn't that useful. You're probably better off taking Duelist Form at this level. Devastating Duelist is the only level 18 feat in this archetype. For one action, strike the opponent with your sword. If you hit, you can attempt a dueling lore check against their will DC. On a success, the foe becomes frightened too. Frightened is a very good condition, and there are very few actions that allow you to get frightened too on just a regular success. So this is a very good feat if you can get this far on your character. There are 2 feats at level 20, but you can't take both of them, even if you've got 3 archetype. I'm not going to go through all of the prerequisites for these feats. Most of them are roleplay anyway, and they're on screen. With Aldori Sword Lord, you can use dueling lore instead of diplomacy to make an impression or request as long as the target is aware of Aldori dueling swords or the request you made is related to your standing as a sword lord. Also, whenever you hit with your sword, you gain temporary hit points that last for 1 round. This is really more of a roleplay feat. The temporary hit points are nice though, since it's every time you hit, it makes it very hard to take you down. It's a good feat, and I can definitely see why it's level 20, and it makes sense why you can't take it with the other feat at this level, is Sword Lord Exile. Aldori Sword Lords are honor-bound to challenge you on sight. You can use dueling lore instead of intimidation to coerce and demoralize your target as long as your sword is visible to the target. This means you can always use dueling lore to demoralize your target while in combat, since you will be using your sword and it will definitely be visible to most opponents, unless they're like blinded or immune to demoralize. But that's kind of what Devastating Duelist is for. Also, the first time you hit a creature with your Aldori dueling sword each round, you deal an additional 5 precision damage. This makes this feat insane on rogues, since you get your sneak attack damage in addition to the extra damage from this feat, assuming they're off guard. But you can make the foe off guard with fainting from one-on-one, or with sense weakness from dueling. And of course, any other way you would normally get the flat-footed condition, especially since you'll have a hand free most of the time if you're not using duelist form, so you can use athletics actions to make them off guard. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you check out this other video on screen. And of course, check the description for more ways to support me as a creator. By next video, I'll hopefully have the Draconic Codex and can start covering that. So look forward to that. Thank you guys so much for watching. And remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.